Hi, I'm Richard Karn, and you may have seen me on TV talking about the world's #1 expandable garden hose. Well, the brand new Pocket Hose Copperhead with Pocket Pivot is here, and it's a total game changer. Old-fashioned hoses get kinks and creases at the spigot, but the Copperhead's Pocket Pivot swivels 360 degrees for full water flow and freedom to water with ease all around your home. When you're all done, this rust-proof anti-burst hose shrinks back down to pocket size for effortless handling and tidy storage. Plus, your super light and ultra-durable Pocket Hose Copperhead is backed with a 10-year warranty. What could be better than that? I'll tell you what, an exciting exclusive offer just for you.
For a limited time, you can get a free Pocket Pivot and their 10-pattern sprayer with the purchase of any size Copperhead hose. Just go to getcopperhead.com. That's getcopperhead.com for your 2 free gifts with purchase. Getcopperhead.com.
Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details.
Hey, warmer from Evo! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VC Family Podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be joined in a few minutes by Blake Lovellt. He does such an amazing job over at Southeastern 16. Taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. We're going to be chatting with him about the offseason that we've seen in the SEC thus far. We'll branch off. We'll talk about a few teams that he's feeling a little bit bullish/bearish on, as well as he does such an amazing job gauging all things college basketball, but do really need to highlight what we've been seeing in terms of this conference, some of the changes that we've been seeing, and additionally, as well, we need to go in-depth with regards to some of these teams that might be able to rise towards the top and might be able to challenge the likes of Florida this season. And then, if you do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you, for this podcast, you have one of 2 ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters CM, they mean does not matter, so per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And while I did not get in any Twitter/X questions, everything is powered by Edge Boost. Over at Edge Boost, they're making sure that bettors are able to access all the funds that they want and they need to anytime, any place, as it is set up for all gambling transactions to be approved 100% of the time. When you go to edgeboost.bet as well, utilize that promo code of Greg, GREG. That'll give you $1 for $1 match on your first deposit up to $25. Now let's chat with our good friend Blake Lovellt. Does such great work over at Southeastern 16. You've seen him on Clutch Point Sports as well. You're able to follow him on Twitter/X at the Blake Lovellt. That last name is spelled Lovell. And Blake, it's always great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Greg.
Thank you for joining me, Blake. And Blake, you know this. I actually started out my career when I was just getting out of college in Nashville, Tennessee, at the official flagship station of the Vanderbilt Commodores. And I think they might be one of the most interesting teams, not just in the SEC, but in all of college basketball. And I want to get your thoughts on this bunch. A team that made the NCAA tournament last year. Obviously, they had some ups and downs there, but I feel like this is a team that is even better here year number 2. I feel like they were really able to do a nice job of being able to build themselves up, build up a sort of camaraderie and a chemistry within that program, and being able to keep a lot of the pieces that they did in the offseason and adding some new ones. I think has this team primed to be able to have themselves a big year.
Yeah, I agree with you, Greg. I mean, look, we did our summer sort of way too early preseason power rankings, and we just did them by tiers. And we split them up between different tiers. We did like a champions tier, contenders, potential sleeper teams, and then, maybe the teams that are more wild cards near the bottom. I think I surprised some people by putting Vanderbilt like in my contenders tier, which is, the tier behind what you think are the potential league type winners. I really think that when you look at the roster that Mark Byington has put together, I mean, they feel like a team that is a top half type team to me. Now, again, are they going to contend necessarily for a regular season title? No, but they seem like a team that, would I be surprised if Vanderbilt's a 6 seed or something like that? I don't think so, because I think when you look at the depth, to me, is what definitely stands out. They certainly feel like they have a little more room with depth this year, where they have guys who, some proven guys that are coming in, whether that is like adding someone as simple as a Duke Miles, right? I feel like that was a significant addition. See what Mike James does now as he gets back into the fold. Obviously, remember kind of the big seasons that guys like Devin McLaughlin, Tyler Nickel, Tyler Tanner, like those guys had. And, I think, to me, it's a more kind of, cohesive bunch. Seems like it fits more of the way Mark Byington wants to play. And, just you may have seen this article I shared from Joey Dwyer on the Vandy SI site. The quote I thought just was tremendous. And Mark Byington said, you're going to see us playing a 6'7" or 6'8" shooting guard this year. We might be 6'7", 6'8" at our 2, 3, and 4, and then you have a 6'10" or 6'11" guy on the inside. So it's a team that's got size. It's got guys who can handle the ball, and I think that's really important in the way Byington wants to play. So I'm very stock up on the Commodores this season.
Yep, I'm right there with you. And I do think that the biggest thing for Vanderbilt is to be able to guard the three-point arc a little bit better. But I do think that their ability to be able to generate turnovers as well is something that we just don't see a ton of in the SEC. And I think that really makes them stand out from a lot of teams within this conference.
Yeah, I agree. And, I feel like the example we always point towards is what Missouri did several seasons ago, right? I feel like that was kind of the blueprint, in that first season for Dennis Gates, where they were a team that came out, they were very efficient offensively, but one of the biggest reasons why they were so successful is because they just forced a lot of turnovers, and it helped a team that wasn't the best rebounding team, wasn't necessarily the best defensive team, but because they created enough of those extra opportunities offensively, it made a difference. And I feel like with Vanderbilt, that certainly can be the situation, this year, where I think you look at it. Last year, they were still a team that did really well, and we all feel like we always talked about it. They had sort of that combination of a team that took care of the ball very well and also forced a lot of turnovers. And so basically taking advantage of your possessions, that's what they did so well. And I feel like, again, this feels like sort of the next evolution of the way Mark Byington wants to play, which we've talked about. He's a high up-tempo type guy, getting guys out in space, running the floor in transition. And I think when you look at just the stockpile of guards, they have, and like you said, I think there is a realistic possibility, if you're looking at their potential starting group. It may be Tyler Nickel at 6'7", Tyler Harris at 6'8", McLaughlin at 6'7", a Jalen Washington or Mason Nicholson both at 6'10", and then of course you've got either Frankie Collins at 6'2" or Tyler Tanner at 6 foot. So again, you're looking at a team that can play at least 4 guys at the same time that are 6'7" or taller. And I think that's going to make a big impact too when you talk about that length and forcing turnovers just with, kind of the way they play defense.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that they are going to be so much fun to watch this season, as Blake Lovellt, who does such great work over at Southeastern 16, is joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops. And typically the dominant team in the state, and we know how big of a rivalry it is, that would be Tennessee. But without Chaz Lanier and really that dominant scorer this year, I feel like there's some question marks with Tennessee, because obviously the defense is going to be there. We know that. But in the last few seasons, the reason why they've gone deeper in the NCAA tournament is having a Dalton Connect and Chaz Lanier. And I just don't know who that guy is going to be for them this season.
Yeah, so I've gone back and forth on Tennessee a lot this offseason. I think this past week I settled more on the optimistic side, and the reason why was simply just looking at Rick Barnes and what they've been able to achieve. And I think when we look at it, they've been a top 5 defensive team 5 straight seasons. They finished in the top 3 4 straight seasons in defensive efficiency. Their offensive efficiency, like you said, has been really reliant on a Dalton Connect, a Chaz Lanier, and those kind of guys. And then you look at their overall record. It's just like they've won at least, I think, 11 conference games the past 4 years. They've won at least 25 games the past 4 years. And so that's where I think this is interesting, is can you keep this going, like you said, without what looks like just a dominant scorer the way they've had the past several years? Or does this look like more of a 2021 Tennessee type team that finished 18-9, 10-7, overall? And of course, that was kind of a year too that was, I don't know, like you're coming off of kind of a weird year and everything the year before. And so I'm not sure exactly what this looks like, but I am more so right now, I think, going to lean on the idea that Rick Barnes just finds a way to make it work. And I think Jacoby Gillespie is a big part of that. To me, he seems like one of the probably top 5 to 7 players in the SEC this season when it comes to just the impact he's going to have. And of course, he's replacing a guy who did so much in Zakai Ziegler. I think for Tennessee, the ceiling is very high. To get there, everything has to come together. And I think that's your biggest question, right? Is even if I'm optimistic banking on the idea that everything's going to come together, which means you're getting kind of the next evolution of Jalen Carey that we saw at Vanderbilt. You have a defensive kind of wizard potentially in Felix Okpara. And so those guys are able to keep them in that top 5 from a defensive standpoint. And of course, you're getting one of the best freshmen in the country, and he has to be that by next March, in Nate Ament. And if all that comes together, I think Tennessee's going to be fine and be, a team that's probably in that top 4, top 5 in the SEC. But like you said, I do think it's a team that has a little less room for error, just because a lot of that focus is going to be that shooting guard spot and really just seeing maybe what the points distribution is for this particular team.
Yep, it certainly is going to be. And I think that they're one of the most intriguing teams out there in the SEC. And I do want to get your thoughts there because I do think that Tennessee is intriguing. And I think there might be a little bit more volatility with them this season because we do have some question marks as to who that alpha dog scorer is going to be. But I do want to just get your open-ended thoughts here. Who do you think is the biggest wild card in this SEC? Because I think that there's a lot of intriguing teams. And I feel like we know what we're going to be able to get out of Florida with them bringing back that front court. Obviously, a little bit of question mark with the backcourt, but I think that there are some things that are shored up there. But is there a team or two that you take a look at and you view them as a team that if things go right, they could really boom in the SEC, and if things go right, things could really go bust in the SEC this year?
Yeah, and I feel like we always, especially with the state of the league the way it is this year, I feel like you can certainly grab quite a few teams in that group. I think two that probably stand out to me are Missouri and Texas A&M. And I think with Missouri, it's like, well, you've got Mark Mitchell, and I mentioned a minute ago Gillespie probably being one of the top 5 to 7 players. I don't think there's any question Mark Mitchell is. And so, if you've got a first-team All-SEC type guy coming back, you've obviously got a lot of size, which has been a theme with Dennis Gates' teams there. Not a surprise. And I think you're banking on an Ant Robinson, who, of course, had really good stretches of basketball last year. You're adding a Sebastian Mack, someone that's got some experience, and, you're still banking on the overall depth. You need some of those freshmen from last year to take a step forward, like Boateng and things like that. So if it comes together, I think it could be another year where Missouri can be really good, but they don't have Caleb Grill to get them out of a lot of different situations that they found themselves in last year. And so I think that's going to be the biggest thing I'm curious about. And they need that front court to step up big time, around Mark Mitchell. So if that's the case, I could see a bit of a higher ceiling for Missouri. I could also see them disappointing a little bit. A&M, I've said many times, anyone that's listened to our stuff recently, there's probably a team that I've not basically changed my opinion on more this offseason than Texas A&M. Because, we talked probably a month and a half ago, and I'm like, they don't have any players. They have one player. And now when you look at the roster that Bucky McMillan has built, I'm getting more and more of the idea that I think this is a team that, quite frankly, may wind up jumping a team like Texas, who I've been very high on this offseason. They might wind up jumping teams like Missouri and Ole Miss, and ones that I think are all kind of in that same sort of area to me in the SEC right now as you look into next season. And so I think A&M starting 5 could be as match up with anybody when you really look at, all the different guys they could sport in terms of Jakari Lane, Pop Isaacs, Rylan Griffin, Mbako, and then Federico. Like, those are a lot of proven guys there in terms of what they've been able to accomplish in college basketball. They got some guys on the bench too that have been able to do that a little bit. And so I think A&M, I don't know if it's going to be Bucky ball this year. I think it's probably a year away in terms of kind of like we talked about with Byington, maybe getting that roster the next year that really fits how you want to play. But I think A&M's ceiling has gotten higher and higher, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if we look up and they're kind of that sleeper team, maybe, come SEC play in January.
Oh, I'm right there with you, and I do think that it's going to be a lot of fun to see what we get out of both Missouri and Texas A&M this season, and additionally, I think that it's interesting what we're going to be getting out of Texas this year. I also want to be asking Blake about the teams that he's maybe a little bit more stock up / stock down on than a lot of folks out there that are covering the SEC, so we'll be talking about that and so much more with Blake on the flip side right here on Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the Beast and Family Podcast.
Hi, I'm Richard Karn, and you may have seen me on TV talking about the world's #1 expandable garden hose. Well, the brand new Pocket Hose Copperhead with Pocket Pivot is here, and it's a total game changer. Old-fashioned hoses get kinks and creases at the spigot, but the Copperhead's Pocket Pivot swivels 360 degrees for full water flow and freedom to water with ease all around your home. When you're all done, this rust-proof anti-burst hose shrinks back down to pocket size for effortless handling and tidy storage. Plus, your super light and ultra-durable Pocket Hose Copperhead is backed with a 10-year warranty. What could be better than that? I'll tell you what, an exciting exclusive offer just for you.
For a limited time, you can get a free pocket pivot and their 10-pattern sprayer with the purchase of any size Copperhead hose. Just go to getcopperhead.com. That's getcopperhead.com for your 2 free gifts with purchase. Getcopperhead.com.
Message and data rates may apply. See terms for details.
And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Discuss Heaps with myself, Greg Heaps Peterson, now part of the VC Family Podcast. Great to be rejoined by Blake Lovellt. He does such great work over at Southeastern 16. Taking a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. You can follow him on the old Twitter/X at the Blake Lovellt. Last name is spelled Lovell. And we were talking a little bit about Missouri, Texas A&M, and how those teams might be a little bit hit or miss this season. But how about if we talk about Texas as well? We're going to be talking about Oklahoma here in a few minutes and some of the teams that in general you're stock up/stock down on, Blake. But how about if we do it upon this Texas team, because we know that they had a coaching change in the offseason. With Texas, I still feel like there's some question marks with Sean Miller coming in, and it's not just whether or not Texas is going to be better this year, but I think it's how much better they're going to be this year.
Yeah, and I think that's where, when I look at just the depth charts right now, I think this thing that I keep coming back to with Texas is I feel like 1 through 7 or so, like, again, we talk about matchups. Like, I think they're a tough matchup, 1 through 7. But I think it's also that there could wind up being some similarities, and I don't think it's the exact same. Remember Arkansas last year, we talked about it. Felt like, you're one injury away from one position from everything just kind of derailing. And I feel like we saw that kind of happen last year where it was more than one injury with Arkansas. I mean, it was just multiple guys got injured. I think they've got, obviously, some of the younger guys on the bench, but you've also look at kind of that core group. And I feel like if Sean Miller can get those guys, if they're all good to go for the entire season and you don't have one of those kind of significant injuries, which, again, we can make this statement for a lot of teams, but that's where I think a Texas to me is different than, let's say, maybe a Vanderbilt, maybe, the top teams like Kentucky and Florida who just have seemingly ridiculous depth. I think Alabama's got good depth. Teams like that, I think that's where, for me with Texas, there's maybe a little less room for error. But at the same time, I think they, with the guys they have, like getting Weaver back, we know was huge. Getting Tremont Mark back was huge. Voki Titus is there. I think Lassina Traore, who we talked about how many years ago now, Greg, when he was at Long Beach State, having him, I think, is kind of the guy that, remember, I mean, he was a very, very impactful player there. If he can kind of be that same type of player and continue to evolve, I feel like Texas is another team that I'd be surprised. I put them in my contenders category too. Like, I'd be surprised if they're not an NCAA tournament team in a top 8 seed type scenario. I just think they have that kind of potential. But, I think that there is something to the idea that what if a few of those guys that are maybe in reserve roles don't necessarily pan out, then, maybe you have a little bit lesser of that room for error.
Yep, no question about it. And when it comes to this Texas team, they're going to be a fun one to be able to gauge. But I do think that this team, the other newcomer to the SEC, is so intriguing as well in Oklahoma because they were built so much around Jeremiah Fears last year. I feel like for better or for worse, because the turnovers for Jeremiah Fears sometimes got a little bit out of control, but so was the great playmaking as well. And I'm not sure how you view this, but perhaps a little bit less in terms of a star player might be more for Oklahoma, because it did feel like they really sunk in the SEC when they went up against teams with a little bit more depth. And while they might not have a player quite as great as Fears, I feel like they are built a little bit more to be able to have different ways to be able to score and different ways to be able to produce.
Agree. They feel way more balanced, and I think that may wind up being, like you said, may not be a bad thing, because it's we remember how the season started. They started 13-0, and then you just got into the grind of SEC play, and you finished 20-14. They lost some close games, like many teams in the SEC did last season. You're a couple plays away. I mean, no further than just the 2 Kentucky games, right, where you're losing at the buzzer basically in 2 games there. They lost a couple other games by 1 possession, so they were very close. But I think maybe you have a team that does feel like, okay, it's a little more balanced. You're maybe not as reliant on one guy. And that's, again, not taking away what some of those other guys did last year, whether it was Moore or Miles or guys like that. I mean, they wound up being, significant contributors. But I do think this is a team that, if we're playing the guessing game, where's Oklahoma going to be picked in the SEC standings in the preseason? My guess is they're in that range of 12 to probably, 14 maybe. I think 14 would just simply be too low, but you never know. I think, they probably wind up in that maybe 12, 13 type range is my guess. But I think they are one that could be a little undervalued just because I think they've got more numbers. Maybe not as much of that. You're not packing the punch you had with Fears, but maybe the overall balance is a little bit better. And, too, we said, remember the pressure we talked about on Porter Mosier coming into last season. It felt like that was his 4th year. It started so well. They got to the tournament, but in reality, they still went 6-12 in the league. And, after a great start, you lost 14 of your last, 21 games or whatever it was. So I think there's a little bit of that still there to me. And so we'll see if they can kind of, put it all together and maybe kind of have that breakthrough season that, quite frankly, they just haven't had yet under Porter Moser.
Yep, with Porter Moser, he finally got to the NCAA tournament, and I felt like he might have been as good as gone if they didn't get to the NCAA tournament, but he was able to bust through, and now this year is going to be a big year for them. And Blake, just as you take a look at the SEC, as you take a look at everything, is there perhaps one team that you're maybe a little bit more stock up / stock down on than a lot of people are, and maybe just different from the general public that is gauging the conference right now?
Yeah, I'm going to give you two teams here, Greg, because I think these are the two that are going to either surprise some people or, may nod and say, yeah, that's kind of what I was thinking. So I pointed this out to, of course, my colleague Max Barr. I pointed this out and said, I think we're both a little bit not concerned, but I think we have more questions than we're used to having when it comes to Alabama and Auburn. But yet I'm like, you know what? They finished, I think both have finished in the top 3 in the SEC, whatever, a good majority of the past 5-6 seasons, whatever it's been. And so can you really bank on, let's say, both of those teams being out of that top 3? Whereas right now, I don't, listen, I think Florida, Kentucky, Arkansas, maybe Tennessee, who knows what order you put those in, but I don't know that I'd put Alabama or Auburn in that first 2 or 3 right now. And I think that's where I really feel like we're going to learn a lot this summer about these two teams, when they start getting into, real hard practice, getting closer to the season, when they get some of these exhibitions, some of these scrimmages, things like that. We're going to find out about some of these, what I think are kind of make it or break it type players, where these are guys who are stepping into very considerable roles, right? I mean, Alabama has lost Mark Sears, Grant Nelson, guys like that. Auburn lost, one of the oldest teams we've seen in college basketball, maybe ever. And they lost, the do-it-all everything guy in Broome. And so what about the guys who are having to replace that? Yes, both of them got stud sophomore guards back. Like Todd Pettiford's back, LeBaron Philon's back. They've got good guard play around them. But I think we cannot sort of maybe underestimate some of the things that each of these teams are losing. And to be honest with you, I've gone back and forth. I may feel like I'm a little higher on Alabama right now just because I think Auburn is such a different team than they were last year. And I kind of do want to see how it all comes together. But I will also say that, guess what? Bruce Pearl, more often than not, figures it out. And I think it's the same with Nate Oates. So even though right now, I said probably your top 6 teams in the SEC to me are Florida, Kentucky, Arkansas, Tennessee, Alabama, Auburn in some order. I may have Alabama and Auburn on the lower end of that, but I think that's a good place to be maybe right now because they kind of have become the hunted for however many seasons now. And it wouldn't surprise me if a lot more people are higher on Florida, Kentucky, Arkansas, maybe heading into the season. And you do have the same old from Nate Oates and Bruce Pearl, where they wind up winning 25-plus games, get their teams to the second weekend of the tournament or beyond possibly, and we're looking up and saying, well, they figured it out at some of these key positions where they had to replace, really, generational type players within their program. So.
Yep, I think that is so well said, especially on Auburn, because Hodge Pettiford coming back for them was big. I don't know where they would be without him, and they've obviously got a nice recruiting class coming in. They did a nice job of being restocking the transfer portal, but I'm right there with you. I do have some question marks there. There's no question marks as to the work that you're putting in, Blake. You do such an incredible job taking a look at this great game of college basketball, so love to get people at home know what's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Yeah, always appreciate it, Greg. Yeah, check out all of our SEC basketball stuff on Southeastern 16. Like I said, we just put out our sort of rankings tiers for the upcoming season. We'll change those probably 50 times before we get to October and November. So, like we said, I think it's a good time to sort of look at these teams this summer, get a good idea of where they stand. But you can check out all of our SEC basketball stuff there, and everything else, you can follow me on Twitter/X at the Blake Lovellt.
And Blake doing an amazing job looking at this great game of college basketball, and every single time he joins me, lends such incredible insight. So big thanks to Blake for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And if you do like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Soups, you're able to subscribe wherever your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I'm coming at you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season, so I'll be back with you once again tomorrow. Thank you.